really have a favorite genre of costuming. I first got into costuming doing a lot of cosplays for DragonCon from the Zelda Ocarina of Time games. And those were a lot of fun to do, but I didn't really do a whole lot of sewing with that. It was just kind of like finding pieces that went together well, a little bit of sewing, a lot of help from my mom. And now I'm doing 18th century stuff, which I love and is super fun, but I also want to move on to other time periods. So yeah, I don't think I have an overarching favorite. I kind of have a favorite as of right now. My favorite material to work with is definitely hands down linen. It is really easy to work with. It stays in place. You can pleat it with your fingers and it lays nicely. And you don't have to worry about being quite as perfect with it. Like, it's gonna get wrinkly anyways. It breathes really nicely when you wear it. And it doesn't slip around when you sew it the way that like silk does. I kind of do a little bit of all three. I cannot use a commercial pattern just the way it is. So if I'm going to use it, I tend to make a lot of modifications to it. And those tend to be either just like straight up guesses based off of what I know of my body. Or recently I did make myself a bootstrap dress form, which is kind of like a replica of my body-ish. It gets close. With that, I've actually moved away from using a pattern. I'm more just kind of using a pattern for reference as far as where like my seam line should be and using it for the instructions for construction, but then draping directly on my dress form or like taping where things should go. Which era would I like to make a costume of? Well, that would be lots. Since I'm just starting out, all I've done so far is 18th century and I have yet to make a complete outfit for that. So I guess you could say 18th century, but beyond that, I love the 1910s. So I think that will probably be what I venture into after I'm done with 18th century. Actually starting this YouTube channel. Everything that I make, I know I'm going to make a video to match it, and so I don't have an event as sort of that like end goal point for making it, but I have the video. There's this character, Verildane Sarasri, and she's a mage and her powers lie with animals, and I did this costume where I was trying to recreate the dress that was on the front cover of the book, and I did it just kind of like winging everything. It didn't turn out to look correct, like the silhouette wasn't the same as what was on the book. The best sewing tool I ever invested in has to be my bootstrap dress form. It has made such a difference in me being able to sew things to fit my body because I am very short. My proportions are not standard, basically. I have a short waist, I have broad shoulders, broad back, but a smaller chest. I think regular patterns don't fit a lot of people, and it, you know, kind of mileage may vary on how much you have to modify a commercial pattern to fit your body. But for me, I could never make the modifications work for my body. It was always so much work to modify it as much as it needed to be modified. And so having that bootstrap dress form has allowed me to make my first draft of things much closer to my body than I ever have before. I definitely pick the project first and then find the materials to work for it. And the reason that I do that is because I live in a small apartment, and so I don't have the space to be able to just like be collecting materials waiting for the day that I will be inspired to use them. I also find that in the past when I have collected materials, I tend to never come up with a project that would be a good fit. I always would think of a project, realize that I didn't have any fabric or notions that worked for it, and then buy new things specifically for that project without ever really touching my stash. I always sew barefoot because I'm always barefoot in my house. But besides the question of how you put your foot on the pedal, I sew standing up. I hate using the sewing machine while sitting down. So I have like a standing desk that I can raise and lower. And so I typically raise it up when I'm going to use my sewing machine. And then I stand at the machine and use the foot on the pedal and kind of, I guess, balance on one leg while I do it. I just feel like I have a lot more control over the pedal and over where the fabric's going when I stand. Most of the time I put my pins in perpendicular to the seam that I'm sewing, but the important thing to do there is like make sure that where you pin is where you're going to sew the seam line across. Like don't pin like an inch in either direction or something, because then the fabric tends to not lay right, if that makes sense. Really, it just depends on my mood. I go back and forth between tea and coffee in the morning, but always decaf because I cannot take any amount of caffeine. It makes me really anxious. I try to keep chocolate for like a special sometimes treat. So yeah, all three. If I have anything on in the background, it tends to distract me from the sewing, and then I make a lot of mistakes that I then later regret. Sometimes I will play music, but most of the time I don't have anything on. I hate pleats. I can never get them to lay right. I can't get them even. Like they just, every time that I have a project with pleats, I go into it thinking, okay, Emily, this will be the time. This is when you're gonna get it. And like I truly, truly believe that I'm gonna be able to master pleats right up until I have to do them and then they don't work. Because the only thing that I ever used to sew were cosplays for Dragon Con. And then with the pandemic, that event was canceled. I initially wasn't going to create anything for it until I had the idea of starting my YouTube channel and doing sewing stuff related to that. There are so many people in this space that I look up to. The first one that I always have to mention is my mom, because without her, I don't think I ever would have started sewing. She sewed when I was growing up, and now she's a quilter. And so I've been around sewing for my entire life. In the historical costuming space, again, there are so many people who make absolutely beautiful things, but one of the people that I really enjoy watching is Sosteen. She makes stuff from the 18th century and she does a lot of really beautiful embroidery work. And she's an inspiration because she has a really demanding professional career as an anesthesiologist. And she has like a young child, and yet she still finds the time to make these beautiful creations and to make YouTube videos. So she's really like that inspiration person of not only someone who does beautiful sewing work, but someone who manages to fit it in around all the other parts of their life that are important to them. If my work got featured in some sort of like professional publication, I think it would say a lot about my work, number one. If I could create things that were beautiful enough and significant enough to be featured in that way. But also I think the experience would be really cool to get to work with like a professional team of people who would like do my hair and do my makeup and then have like a professional photographer and just like the whole professional setup, I think would be really cool. I currently have three things lurking in my UFO bin. One is a cottage core corset that I have the pieces, the fabric all cut out for, but have not done any construction on. The other two are undergarments for 1910s, so like a little combinations, and then the 1910s corset, both of which I started, got super frustrated with, and abandoned while also telling myself that I probably shouldn't have started 1910 stuff while I was in the middle of trying to finish my 18th century projects. So 3 UFOs right now. So I have 2 goals moving forward that I have set for myself recently. The first one is just to finish an entire outfit, like garments, accessories, everything head to toe, so that I can do a photo shoot based off of it. The second goal is to not give myself any deadlines. I want this to be a fun hobby that I do to de-stress and to be creative with. And I don't want it to feel like a chore or like something that's providing more stress in my life. I definitely take my pins out as I go. I am definitely afraid of sewing over a pin and having my needle like hit the pin and break. I've seen other people leave the pins in and just sew over it, and somehow their needles never hit the pin. I don't know how that's possible. I would like to learn how to drape. I have my dress form now, which somewhat resembles my body, so I think if I could learn how to drape, that would just open up a whole world of possibilities. My 18th century stays. I learned a lot about the shape of my body through the fitting process that just made a lot of things in my sewing past life make more sense.